The House with a Clock in its Walls, Chapter 3. On the first Monday after Labor Day, Lewis started going to school in New Zebedee, and before long he had forgotten all about the mysterious clock in the walls. He had troubles enough of his own. They weren't new troubles. They were the troubles that a fat boy who can't play baseball carries around with him from place to place. Lewis had always been overweight. He couldn't remember a time when he hadn't been. All his life, all 10 years of it, he had been listening to children who chanted, "Fatty, fatty, 2x4, can't get through the kitchen door." Sometimes he wanted to beat up the kids who made fun of him, but he couldn't box, and he wasn't very strong. There was another problem, but that was another problem. But the worst problem of all was the baseball problem. Lewis still spun all the way around when he swung at a ball, and he threw his bat. At first, he tried to excuse himself by saying, "Watch out, I'm going to throw the bat." But the other kid said, "Look, you throw the bat and we're going to beat you up. You hang on to it when you swing or you can't play." That is what they said when they let him play, which was not very often. Most of the time, when he lined up to be chosen, he was the last one left, and the captain of the side that was supposed to take him usually said, "Why do we have to take him? He can't field, he can't hit, he can't pitch, he can't even run. Come on, we'll play one man short." What they said about Lewis was true. Sometimes a new boy or a kind boy would get to be captain, and he would choose Lewis for his team. But when Lewis came to bat, he usually struck out. If he hit the ball, it popped up and the pitcher caught it. Or he might ground out to first base. When his team was out in the field, the boys made Lewis play right field because not many balls got hit out that way. But when one did, Lewis always dropped it, unless it hit him on the head. He would stagger back and forth as he tried to keep track of the ball that hung there, high over his head, but he always got dizzy and covered his face with his glove and screamed, "No, no!" as the ball came toward him. After a while, even the kind boys turned him down. One afternoon, when the usual routine had been gone through and Lewis had run off the field sobbing because they would not let him play, he found himself standing at home plate on a baseball diamond that wasn't being used that day. At his feet were a bat, a thick old club with a split handle that had been wrapped up with black friction tape. There was a softball nearby, or what was left of one, a black, sticky, egg-shaped lump covered with string. Lewis picked up the ball and the bat. He threw the ball into the air and swung at it. He missed. He picked up the ball and tried again. Again he missed. He was about to try for the third time when someone said, "You're doing it all wrong." Lewis turned and saw a skinny boy about his own age squatting next to the bicycle rack. There was a big fluff of brick-red hair on top of the boy's head, and his right arm was in a sling. The boy was Tarby. Everybody in school knew who Tarby was. Even Lewis knew, and he had only been in New Zebedee for a couple of months. Probably everybody in New Zebedee, and most of the people in Capernaum County knew who Tarby was. At least that was the impression that Lewis got. Tarby was the most popular boy in the school. He was a daredevil, the kind of boy who rode his bicycle through bonfires and hung by his knees from the limbs of trees. All the girls liked him, and he was a big home run hitter in the softball games. He got chosen first so often that most of the time the boys made him a captain, just to avoid all the fighting over who got to have Tarby on their team. But here he was, with his arm in a sling, watching Lewis as he tried to hit the ball. "I said you're doing it wrong. You're supposed to keep your feet planted flat. Then you swing from the hips. Here, let me show you." Tarby scrambled to his feet and walked over to where Lewis was standing. He grabbed the bat and hefted it in one hand, choking up on it a bit. "Okay," he said. "Get out there and pitch. Just lob it up here." Lewis had never seen anyone trying to hit a ball with the bat held only in one hand. He was afraid that Tarby would miss and get mad and go home. With a nervous grin on his face, Lewis lobbed the ball toward the plate. Tarby swung and the bat connected. Clack! It struck the ball with that rickety hollow sound that split bats have. The ball shot on a line toward center field. It would have been a clean single. "See? And that's just with one arm. You ought to be able to do that with two. Come on, I'll pitch." Lewis walked in front of the pitcher's mound and took the bat from Tarby's hand. "I didn't know your arm was broken," said Lewis shyly. "How'd you do it?" "Fell out of a tree. I was hanging by my knees, upside down, like in the monkey house. It's okay, it'll heal up." Tarby walked out to the mound. Lewis pounded his bat on the plate and waved it the way he had seen George Kell do in Briggs Stadium in Detroit. But when Tarby threw the ball, Lewis missed as usual. Every day for the next 2 weeks, Tarby met Lewis after school, and they practiced batting. Slowly, gradually, Lewis's swing got better. He even managed to hit a few line drives. But something even more important was happening. Lewis and Tarby were getting to be friends. Tarby liked Lewis's jokes, and Lewis found that Tarby hated some of the kids he hated. Lewis liked Tarby's imitation of Mrs. Fondreiter, a mean teacher at school. Mrs. Fondreiter always called her husband Gerald, which was a funny thing to do. Tarby made a loop at the end of a green twig and pretended it was an eyeglasses on a stick. Then he would stare through the loop at Lewis and say in a high voice, "How dare you say such things to me, Gerald?" Then Lewis and Tarby would sit around planning how they were going to take care of Carol K. Laberdeen, a snotty girl in the 6th grade who got away with murder because her father was on the school board. It was usually dark by the time Lewis and Tarby said goodbye to each other by the mailbox at the bottom of High Street. One afternoon in October, Lewis and Tarby were out at the athletic field playing flies and grounders. Lewis had gotten good enough so that he could hit Tarby some pretty long fly balls. Tarby's arm was still in a cast, but he picked off the line drives and caught the pop flies easily, as if he had 2 hands. Lewis was out in the field. It was getting dark, and he was having trouble seeing the ball. And besides, he was a little bored. He stood there thinking or doping off, as Tarby called it. He wanted to do something nice for Tarby, something nice that would really impress him and make him a stronger friend than ever. Maybe he could get Uncle Jonathan to do a magic trick for Tarby. Sure, that would do it. Lewis hesitated a minute, remembering Jonathan saying that he was only a parlor magician, the kind that pulled rabbits out of hats and told you what card you were holding in your hand. But then he had said that he knew a few tricks that went beyond that. Lewis thought some more. Oh well, Jonathan could probably do it. Anyone who could make windows change their pictures could do what Lewis had in mind. And anyway, Lewis thought that he remembered hearing Jonathan say that he had done such a thing once. "Hey, Lewis, I hit the ball out to you about 6 hours ago. Did you go to sleep?" Lewis looked up. "Huh? Oh, gee, I'm sorry, Tarby. Say, how would you like to see my uncle eclipse the moon?" Tarby stared at him. "What did you say?" I said, "Oh, come on, Tarby, let's go home. It's too dark to see the ball." "Come on, I'll tell you all about my Uncle Jonathan. He's a real wizard." The 2 boys walked back under the streetlights, playing catch as they went. Lewis tried to explain about Uncle Jonathan's magic powers, but you could see that Tarby was not convinced. "Boy, I'll bet your uncle can eclipse the moon. I'll just bet he can. He probably sits up in his room drinking beer, and then he goes out in the backyard and stares at the moon, and boy, does it go round and round." Tarby staggered out into the street and rolled his eyes. Lewis felt like hitting him, but he knew that Tarby could beat him up, so he just said, "You want to see him do it?" "Yeah," said Tarby in a sneery voice. "I want to see him do it." "Okay," said Lewis. "I'll ask him tonight. When he's ready to do it, I'll let you know." "Gee, I hope I won't have to wait too long," said Tarby sarcastically. "I really do want to see old Lard Guts eclipse the moo-hoo-ha-ha." "Stop it. Stop making fun of my uncle." Lewis's face was red, and he was almost crying. "Make me," said Tarby. "I can't, and you know it," said Lewis. Tarby went on moo-hooing until they reached the khaki-colored mailbox at the foot of the high street. This time, when they split up to go home, Lewis didn't say goodbye to Tarby. He didn't even wave. But by the time he was inside the gate at 100 High Street, Lewis had gotten over his mad, more or less, and he went straight inside to see his uncle. He found Jonathan laying out a game of solitaire on the dining room table. It was a complicated game called Napoleon at St. Helena, and the layout covered most of the ivory-colored oilcloth pad. Jonathan looked up and smiled as Lewis walked into the room. "Hi, Lewis. How's baseball these days?" "Getting better, I guess. Tarby helps a lot. Say, Uncle Jonathan, do you suppose we can do something nice for Tarby? He's a really good friend of mine." "Sure, Lewis. We'll invite him to dinner. Is that what you mean?" Lewis blushed and fidgeted. Well, yeah, kinda. Do you think that maybe after dinner we could, you could eclipse the moon for him?" Jonathan stared at him. "Did I tell you I could do that?" "Yes, remember one night you were bragging or talking to Mrs. Zimmerman about whether earth magic was stronger than moon magic? You said that a moon wizard could eclipse the moon anytime he felt like it, and that you were a moon wizard?" Jonathan smiled and shook his head. Did I say that? My. How I do run on. Let me see. I do seem to recall eclipsing the moon one night in 1932. That was during a picnic out at Wilder Creek Park. I remember the date, April 30th, which is Walpurgis Night. That's the night when witches and warlocks all over the world get together for whoop-de-doos. Ours was just a convention of the Capernaum County Magicians Society, but some of them are real wizards. At any rate, to get back to what I was saying... Never mind, said Louis, turning away with a pouty look on his face. I'll tell Tarby you can't do it. Oh, Louis, cried Jonathan, throwing the pack of cards on the table. You are the most easily discouraged boy I ever met. If I did it once, I can do it again. It's just not a normal occurrence, and everything has to be just right. In the heavens, that is. Oh. Yes, oh. Now, as soon as I have won this silly game for myself, you and I will go to the library and consult the almanac. So be quiet for a minute. Louis fidgeted and clasped and unclasped his hands, and stared at the light fixture until Jonathan finished his game. Then the two of them went to the library, slid back the paneled doors, and entered the marvelous room that smelled of damp paper, wood smoke, and Turcomen's Terror, Jonathan's personal tobacco blend. Jonathan then moved a stepladder up to the part of the wall that contained his magic books, climbed up and pulled down a dusty volume labeled Hardesty's Universal Omnium Gatherum, Perpetual Calendar, Datebook, Almanac, and Book of Days. He flipped to the section on eclipses, did some rapid mental calculations, then said, You're in luck, Louis. 1948 is a good year for lunar eclipses. The planets will be favorable next Friday. Invite Tarby for dinner that night. I'll be ready. Friday night came around, and Louis brought Tarby home for dinner. There was nothing especially magic about the meal, except that the cider jug on the table burped a lot, and that might have been because the cider was getting hard. After the dishes were cleared away, Jonathan asked Louis and Tarby to help Mrs. Zimmerman carry some kitchen chairs out into the backyard. Then he walked out into the front hall and consulted his cane rack. A blue willow-ware vase full of walking sticks of all sizes and shapes. Some had ivory or bone handles. Some were tough, crooked old pieces of hickory or maple wood, and some had thin, springy swords concealed inside. But only one cane was magic. It was a long black rod of some very hard wood. At one end was a ferrule of polished brass. At the other end was a glass globe the size of a baseball. It seemed to be snowing inside the globe. Through the swirling little flakes you could see now and then an odd little miniature castle. The globe burned with an icy gray light. Jonathan picked up the cane, hefted it, and walked back toward the kitchen with it tucked under his arm. Out in the backyard the audience was ready. Mrs. Zimmerman, Louis, and Tarby sat in straight chairs facing the bird bath. It was a chilly, clear October night. All the stars were out, and a full moon was rising over the 4 elm trees at the far end of Jonathan's yard. The screen door slammed, and everyone looked up. The magician had arrived. Without saying a word, Jonathan went around to the north side of the house. An old mossy rain barrel stood there against the sandstone wall. Jonathan looked into the barrel, breathed 3 times on the dark water, and with his left forefinger cut the faintly shimmering surface into 4 quarters. Then he leaned low over the mouth of the barrel and began whispering in a strange language. The 3 spectators had not left their chairs. Jonathan had told them to stay where they were, but they craned their necks around a good deal to try to figure out what the wizard was doing. A whispering, weirdly magnified by the mouth of the barrel, went on for some time. Louis twisted way around in his chair, but all he could see was the dark shape of Uncle Jonathan and the faintly glowing gray globe of the magic cane. Finally Jonathan returned. In one hand he held the cane. In the other he had a saucepan full of rainwater. "Is your uncle going to wash his hair?" whispered Tarby. "Oh, be quiet," hissed Louis. "He knows what he's doing. Just you watch." And there we will pause.